everyone, today we're going to cover Powkiddy's A30 micro console. The Powkiddy A30 has a similar hardware, the same OS, and shares many other similarities with the Trim UI Model S, also known as Powkiddy's A66, which I previously covered on the channel. There's a couple of differences. The A30 has a bigger 2.8-inch IPS screen, twice the size battery, and it's supposed to last up to 4 hours, and a really nice Gameboy Advance style shell. The Powkiddy A30 is supposed to be able to support over 10 emulators, essentially up to PlayStation 1, though like the A66 before it, at least with the stock software, PS1 emulation really struggles. There's dedicated buttons for home and brightness, a power switch, tiny volume wheel and 4 shoulder buttons. The box is pretty colourful and generic, including a charging cable instructions alongside the cable. Straight out of the box, the A30 looks absolutely great, especially in the see-through red case, as in my unit. It looks like a shrunken, slightly modernised GBA, which is one of my favourite handhelds, and there's a lot of neat small details that complement the design. The text embedded in the case for things like power, start and select is really clear throughout. It's actually very comfortable to hold. All the inputs are easily reachable, the 2.8-inch screen fits the design well, the bezels are actually fitting into the retro design. It's a pretty ergonomic little device due to its size, mostly thanks to the design inspiration. There's only a poor front-facing mono speaker present, but you don't cover it while in use, which for once is probably a bad thing as you'll hear during the gameplay videos later. Unfortunately, the controls don't match the rest of the case's build quality. The D-pad itself is a comfortable design, it's perfect size in relation to the handheld, but the membrane behind it is way too soft, so there's next to no resistance when pressing in any direction. Applying a little pressure dead centred to the D-pad presses all the directions down simultaneously, and because of the lack of resistance, the travel is very limited, so you'll likely accidentally press multiple directions when aiming just for one. The buttons don't fare too much better. There's potential there, there's a nice height to them with a satisfying press at least, but they feel hollow, which makes the inputs feel significantly softer than they actually are. There's slightly too much room for each button, which makes each have a slight wobble on your thumb and too much flex on each press. This ultimately means that the button mashing becomes uncomfortable very quickly and would immediately put you off while playing. The best inputs are certainly those at the top of the mini handheld. The home and brightness buttons, ironically the buttons you'll probably press the least, feel the most comfortable, as they're the most secure out of any of the inputs. The shoulder buttons actually come across comparatively quite well too, though there's still more movement in the shell than there needs to be. So overall, when it comes to controls, the Powkiddy A30 comes out disappointing, which is a massive shame when the overall build quality of the casing is surprisingly good. But a retro handheld's only ever going to be played with good controls and software, so the controls being substandard is a big disappointment. Speaking of disappointments, the A66 before it suffered a lot on release due to its poorly optimised software, and one of the biggest disappointments with the A30 is that it has the same software with none of the fixes the community supported their A66 with. This means things are far more sluggish than they need to be, gameplay is hindered because of it, and you have distracting software-related screen tearing in some of the emulators. It's massively disappointing to see the same issues pop up again, especially considering how well the A66 was adopted once the software side was actually sorted out by the community. With the issues the A30 has regarding its controls, it would be far from the perfect micro console, even with all the software issues fixed. But as I mentioned before, the retro handheld's ultimately only going to be used if it has a combination of good controls and software, and the A30 has neither. It's such a shame that this software was known to be a limiting factor previously, so to deal with it again does leave you with a bitter taste. I mentioned the controls again because the OS does have an input hardware test, which will hopefully get across some of the disappointments I have with them. A few presses don't register first time, despite an audible press being heard, multiple inputs are accidentally pressed, and the lack of travel really hinders things. It really is such a shame, as the design of the handheld's lovely, the build quality is surprisingly good, and there's just so much potential here. I'll cut to some gameplay now, and summarise up at the end. So overall, I am disappointed with Powkiddy's A30. It's such a great design, it's comfortable for its size, and the case build quality is pretty good. Unfortunately, the controls are substandard and the software is poor, extremely limiting the playability of the Powkiddy A30 overall. This unfortunately limits the Powkiddy A30 to being, at its best, eye candy while on display, which is a massive shame, and it just has so much potential to be great. That's it for now though, thanks so much for watching.